The new Vince McMahon Netflix documentary confirms a very dark truth about the former chairman of the board of WWE. That being that in the eyes of many viewers and in his own words, Vince McMahon is indeed a monster. McMahon is the most influential and impactful human being to ever step foot in the world of professional wrestling. His impact on the industry is bigger and his shadow looms larger than anyone who came before or after him. And there is no one more synonymous with the world of professional wrestling than Vince McMahon. All of this is true, and while all of it is true, we cannot ignore some of the things that were very blatant in the documentary, point to Vince McMahon at worst being one of professional wrestling's most despicable and irredeemable figures, and at best, someone who is indifferent to the pain and emotions of other people. Either way you draw it up, Vince McMahon is not someone who is a sympathetic figure, and throughout the documentary, there were many times where Vince McMahon even confirmed that fact. Vince McMahon, when talking about the death of Owen Hart, when it was discussed that Owen Hart's blood was right there on the mat at Over the Edge 1999 where he died, Vince McMahon was asked about a quote from Bret Hart where Bret Hart said that if it was Shane splattered on the mat, Vince would not let the show go on. And instead of either confirming that or apologizing for something that is clearly wrong, Vince McMahon instead took to the defense and said that if it was Shane or if it was him, he would expect that show to go on because that's how Vince McMahon operates. Vince McMahon does not care if someone dies. Vince McMahon is not someone who cares about other people's emotions. At the end of the day, and this fact was made clear throughout the documentary, his main purpose, his main goal, and his main objective is to maintain the integrity and do, quote, what's best for business, even if that means hurting people. And one of the things that really brings this out is Vince McMahon towards the end of the documentary talking about the idea of retiring. He says, quote, "I never see myself retiring. I never understood why people stop growing. When you stop growing, you die." This shows you how dedicated and obsessed he was with the business. And in many respects, this could be taken as a good thing, but when you're talking about people's lives, when you're talking about the idea of people having to go on and do a show when their friend is wheeled past them, likely dead, and then later confirmed to be dead, and they have to wrestle matches with the remnants of that incident, that horrible incident of Owen Hart's death still there, it clearly shows that there is no line that Vince McMahon won't cross when it comes to his business. And this can also be seen in other instances where Vince McMahon is quite callous about the allegations that have come out from several WWE employees. Of course, Rita Chatterton was one of these employees who in the late 80s launched a lawsuit against Vince McMahon and launched allegations against him of assault, to which Vince McMahon in the documentary firmly denies, however, goes on to state that even if it had been assault, the statute of limitations have run out, therefore it doesn't matter. And if there's nothing else in this documentary that paints Vince McMahon in a bad light, if there's one thing to take away, is that Vince McMahon is someone who obviously feels no remorse or regret for any action he's taken. Regardless of if it's perceived as the right action or the morally just action, McMahon is indifferent to this fact. And in that way, he comes across as very sociopathic. In that way, he comes across as selfish. And he comes across as someone who just does not give a crap about anyone else. There are several other instances we can point to in the documentary where this is brought up on a lower level than some of the other more serious allegations against him. There's, of course, the instance of Vince McMahon expanding WWE at the expense of the territories, which he was asked whether or not it was good for the industry, to which he said, quote, I don't know if it was good for the industry, but it was good for me and my organization. And he later on even contradicted himself when discussing Turner and the rise of WCW in the 90s. He compared that to something that was malicious. He compared Ted Turner going in and competing with Vince in an unethical, malicious way, even though in many ways it was many of the same tactics that Vince McMahon himself had deployed against the territories in the 80s. But to Vince McMahon, it didn't matter because it was happening to him. It was happening to his organization. It was happening to the thing he obsessed about more than anything else, his business. And the docuseries also goes in and outlines several of the allegations that have been brought up against Vince McMahon. The allegations in 2006 of an incident at a tanning salon where Vince McMahon allegedly assaulted a woman there. The $12 million paid to 4 different women to cover up allegations of sexual misconduct, with some of the allegations being even more serious than the Janelle Grant lawsuit that was launched earlier this year, including $7.5 million to a former wrestler who he allegedly assaulted. It also goes through Vince McMahon's January 2023 return, where he worked his way back into the WWE in a very Machiavellian type way, and did so with the idea that he would maintain power of his business. The documentary also even discusses allegations that Ashley Massaro had levied towards Vince McMahon in a statement that was released following her passing in 2019, that Vince McMahon had made advances towards her, and when she refused to go along with it, Vince McMahon embarrassed her on live TV, even showing the incident that happened in the documentary on live TV. And WWE, of course, also knew about other allegations that had to do with Ashley Massaro and did not act quickly or swiftly or in a manner that you would expect a company to do so, adding to a culture that was non-protective of women, that was in many ways harmful towards women, objectified them, that Vince McMahon was heading. And at the end of the day, you can think that Vince McMahon is the greatest booker in professional wrestling history. You can think that Vince McMahon is the most important figure in professional wrestling history. You can think all of these things that are true about McMahon and what he did to build up WWE into what it is today. But you can't tell his story without talking about his flaws. You can't tell the story of Vince McMahon without talking about his behavior. You cannot tell the story about Vince McMahon without talking about the fact that even in his own words, he is indeed a monster.